Hey y'all, thought we'd pop in today to talk about the difference between sewing, quilting, and embroidery. Because apparently owning a needle and some thread does not automatically mean we're all doing the same thing. Who knew? Fiber crafts have an enormous extended family, and like any extended family, some members look suspiciously similar until you actually spend time with them. Sewing, quilting, and embroidery all involve fabric, needles, thread, and occasionally muttering things under your breath when something goes terribly wrong. But they have different purposes, use different techniques, and often require different tools. Understanding those differences matters, especially when you're starting out, because buying supplies for the wrong craft is an excellent way to acquire 17 things you don't need, while somehow still not owning the one thing you actually require. Let's start with sewing, because sewing is basically the practical workhorse of this particular family. At its simplest, sewing means joining pieces of fabric together with stitches. You can do that by hand, you can use a sewing machine, or you can spend 20 minutes fighting with a sewing machine before deciding that perhaps hand sewing represents a simpler and more spiritually fulfilling existence. That's usually where I end up. Sewing is primarily about construction. You're making a garment, you're attaching a sleeve, creating a bag, hemming curtains, repairing something, adding a zipper, or turning several suspiciously shaped pieces of fabric into an object that eventually resembles the picture on the pattern envelope. Sewing certainly can be decorative, but its fundamental job is usually to make separate pieces of fabric become one functional thing without falling apart. Because sewing is so broad, its tool collection can range from surprisingly simple to, I appear to have accidentally opened a small fabric store. You need needles, thread, scissors, pins or clips maybe, measuring tools, and usually some kind of marking tool. A seam ripper is also an essential, because we are optimistic people, not delusional people. Mistakes will happen. Sewing machines are common, but not technically necessary, because humans were sewing for a very long time before somebody decided the needle should move several hundred times per minute and occasionally terrify us with a noise that clearly means something expensive has just happened. Different projects also require different needles, threads, fabrics, and machine settings, which is why learning basic sewing skills gives you such a useful foundation for exploring almost every other textile craft. Quilting lives right next door to sewing, but quilting is more specialized. Technically, quilting refers to stitching together layers of material, traditionally a decorative or pieced top, batting in the middle, and backing fabric underneath. That distinction matters because piecing a quilt top and actually quilting it are related activities, but they aren't exactly the same thing. You could spend approximately 3 geological eras cutting tiny pieces of fabric and sewing them into beautiful blocks, but until those layers are joined together, you actually haven't completed the quilting portion. This is one of those fiber art distinctions that sounds ridiculously picky until you start quilting. Then suddenly you're explaining the difference to someone at dinner while everyone else quietly regrets asking what you've been working on lately. Welcome to having a specialized hobby. We have terminology. Quilting also brings its own assortment of tools and techniques to the party. Rotary cutters, self-healing cutting mats, quilting rulers, batting, quilting cotton, specialized needles, and various threads quickly begin reproducing when left unattended in a craft room. I have no scientific evidence that rulers breed overnight, but I'm also not prepared to rule it out. Quilters often work with very precise measurements because tiny inaccuracies can multiply across dozens of blocks. Being off by 1/8 of an inch doesn't sound dramatic until you've repeated that mistake 48 times and your beautiful rectangular quilt has developed ambitions of becoming a trapezoid. Quilting can be done by hand or by machine, and the actual quilting stitches can be simple straight lines, intricate free motion designs, or really elaborate patterns that become an artistic feature of the finished piece themselves. Then we have embroidery, which looked at all this practical fabric construction and apparently said, that's lovely, but what if we spent 6 hours making one flower? Embroidery is primarily about decorating fabric using thread and stitches. Instead of joining fabric pieces together or securing multiple layers, you're creating designs on the surface. Those designs might be flowers, animals, letters, borders, landscapes, abstract patterns, or anything else you can reasonably convince thread to become. Embroidery can use wonderfully varied stitches, including backstitch, satin stitch, chain stitch, French knots, and dozens upon dozens of others. And yes, French knots occasionally decide they no longer recognize your authority. That's normal. Embroidery lets you essentially draw with thread, except your pencil has to repeatedly stab through the paper and sometimes become tangled underneath it for reasons only known to the ancient fiber gods. Embroidery tools look deceptively innocent. You need fabric, embroidery needles, floss or another suitable thread, scissors, and usually a hoop or frame to maintain tension. That's it, right? That's how they get you. Soon, you discover different flosses, specialty threads, metallic threads, silk threads, linen fabrics, transfer pens, stabilizers, hoops in 14 sizes, and an entire universe of stitches you suddenly desperately need to try right now today. The important distinction, though, remains purpose. Embroidery embellishes. Sewing constructs. Quilting layers and secures. That's the simplest way to separate them. If you're joining pieces together to create an object, you're probably sewing. If you're joining layers to create a quilted textile, you're quilting. If you're covering fabric with tiny decorative stitches while wondering why you chose a pattern containing 4,000 French knots, you're embroidering and possibly reconsidering several life decisions. Knowing those differences becomes particularly important when you're choosing supplies, because thread is not one universal substance bestowed upon humanity in conveniently interchangeable spools. Regular sewing thread is designed for sewing. Quilting threads have characteristics suited to quilting. Embroidery floss is designed to create decorative stitches and is often composed of strands that can be separated depending on the effect you want. Needles differ too. Their sizes, shapes, points, and eye sizes are designed around particular jobs. Fabric behaves differently depending on its weave, weight, and fiber content. Could you occasionally force the wrong material to do the job anyway? Of course. Fiber artists are extremely resourceful people. We can accomplish remarkable things through determination and poor decisions. But using supplies designed for your technique usually produces better results with considerably less swearing. The differences also help you understand what kind of crafting experience you're actually looking for. If you love the idea of making clothing, bags, home decor, costumes, or practical objects, sewing gives you enormous versatility. If arranging colors and patterns makes your brain ridiculously happy and you don't mind precision, quilting may be your natural habitat. If you enjoy slow, detailed handiwork, where small changes in stitch direction and color create an image, embroidery might be perfect. None of that means you're permanently assigned to one camp either. There aren't any fabric police. Nobody is going to step out of a car and announce that you're an embroiderer now and therefore forbidden from approaching a sewing machine. You can enjoy all three of these. Two of them, one of them, or bounce between them depending on what sounds interesting that week. In fact, some of the most interesting projects happen when these techniques start overlapping. You might sew a dress and then embroider flowers around the neckline. You might piece and quilt a wall hanging and then embroider details afterward. You could embroider a beautiful design and sew that finished panel into a cushion, garment bag, or other project. Once you understand what each technique actually does, combining them becomes much easier because you know which skill solves which problem. That's one of the lovely things about fiber arts in general. Crochet can meet embroidery. Knitting can incorporate decorative stitching. Sewing can wander into quilting. Quilting can invite embroidery over for coffee. And eventually your craft room contains supplies from 6 different hobbies that all seem completely reasonable individually. Collectively, however, they may require additional shelving. And if you're coming to these crafts from knitting, crochet, or cross-stitch, don't assume you're starting completely from scratch. You already understand concepts like tension, fiber behavior, following patterns, counting carefully, and discovering halfway through a project that apparently numbers are more complicated than previously believed. Cross-stitch gives you experience working with a needle and thread to create decorative imagery. Knitting and crochet teach you how dramatically fiber choice can affect a finished piece. Those skills don't transfer perfectly because every craft has its own techniques, but the patience and problem solving absolutely do. More importantly, you've already learned the universal law of fiber arts. Sometimes you have to undo an hour of work because something went wrong 20 minutes after you confidently decided everything was going beautifully. So why does knowing the difference between sewing, quilting, and embroidery actually matter? Because understanding what each craft is designed to accomplish helps you choose appropriate tools, learn the right techniques, find useful instructions, and decide what kind of project you actually want to make. Sewing builds things. Quilting creates layered textiles and uses stitching to hold those layers together. Embroidery decorates fabric with stitched designs. They're closely related, they overlap constantly, and they can work beautifully together, but they aren't interchangeable names for the same activity. Learning the distinction isn't about becoming the craft terminology police and dramatically bursting into someone's house because they called embroidery sewing. It's about understanding your materials well enough to make creating easier, more enjoyable, and considerably less confusing. Well, y'all, that's about it. If you sew, quilt, embroider, knit, crochet, cross-stitch, or have somehow collected enough hobbies that answering the question, what kind of fiber artist are you, now requires a PowerPoint presentation, drop a comment and tell me which craft is currently taking over your workspace. And if you tried more than one of these, I'd love to know which one surprised you the most, because every craft has that moment when you discover that supposedly simplest part is absolutely not simple at all. Maybe it was your first zipper, your first quilt block that refused to be square, or your first French knot that became less of a knot and more of an incident. Whatever you're making, remember that every new technique adds another tool to your creative toolbox, and apparently another reason to buy storage containers. Happy stitching!